Hi, my name is Katie Brooks, and this is my presentation on how divorce affects adolescents' risk of depression and poor peer relationships. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So, the mental health and well-being of adolescents of divorce is often overlooked. However, there can be lifelong consequences that, if not cared for, can affect adolescents for the rest of their life. The first study that I chose to look at was the effects of marital disruption on adolescence by A.K. Frost. This study focused on a longitudinal study examining the effects of parental divorce on adolescent functioning. 404 children were surveyed 3 times a year from ages 6 to 15. In this study, researchers found that children had just as much anxiety and depression as those from intact families. However, many of these teenagers engaged in more drug and alcohol abuse. Adolescents from recently disrupted families reported more antisocial behavior. Antisocial behavior meaning vandalism, police interaction, incarceration, poor behavior in school, and other things like that. These students tend to engage more in risk-taking behaviors than those from intact family. Our next study looked at the longitudinal study of divorce and remarriage by E.M. Hetherington. This study involved 144 families with single mothers. They surveyed at 2 months after the divorce, 1 year, and 2 years after the divorce, with 2 follow-ups at the ages of 10 and 15. Divorced and remarried families reported more negative life stressors. As we know, single mothers tend to have more outside stress than intact families with 2 parents in the home. They tend to have lower socioeconomic standing, which means that they are higher in stress for financial situations. In addition to finances, children of divorce tend to have a lot of stress relating to moving and new homes, and so moving with a single mother can be hard. Many of these stresses, though, are centered around new family roles and relationships. So when a family gets divorced, the children tend to have to rework their position in the family as either a caretaker, when they may have not have been a caretaker, and other roles like that. Even as adults, many people still view their parents' divorce as traumatic. However, despite the stress and trauma experienced, most adolescents of divorce are able to live a happy and fulfilling lives. Our next resource to look at is Parental Divorce and Early Initiation of Alcohol Abuse by K.M. Jackson. In this study, 931 students in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade were surveyed. They were surveyed over 3 years semi-annually. They reported their age at first drink and time of parents' divorce or separation. They also were surveyed on their perceived stress and history of parental drinking. This is important to note because it is more likely for a student to engage in alcohol use if their parents use alcohol. So this study found that 11% more of children who experienced parental divorce experienced their first alcoholic drink earlier than those who didn't. They concluded that parental divorce is ranked above perceived stress and parental alcohol abuse, suggesting that divorce is a greater risk for alcohol use in adolescents. Our next topic goes into therapy. So this next study looked at how conjoint mother-daughter treatment allows females to engage more and have a better life after divorce. This study was done on mother-daughter relationships post-divorce. Mother and daughter relationships were found to be the basis of interpersonal functioning within the daughter. These crucial relationships set set up the female for being able to confidently and healthily cope with parental divorce. So a healthy mother-daughter relationship allows females who tend to deal with divorce a little bit more negatively. It allows them to cope more healthily with the change in home, the change in family role, all things like that. We see that daughters with poor mother-daughter relationships are more likely to have poor peer relationships and decreased self-esteem. These females are also more likely to engage in more risky behavior like alcohol and drugs. Next, we look at the effects of divorce on adolescent development by R. Mosey. They decided to study the clinical symptoms of both parents and children. They studied 120 neurotic adolescents and parents from non-intact families. Parents who divorced were more likely to have antisocial adolescents. These children also had the tendencies to be ambivalent towards their non-custodial parents. So meaning that they felt less loyalty, were more hostile and things like that towards their non-custodial parents, so the parent that they did not live with, or that the parent that did not gain custody of them during the divorce. Adolescents who are already experiencing psychological issues are more enhanced with issues following the divorce, separation, remarriage, and even death of the parents. So this study went a little bit more in depth, looking also at parents who had remarried, so kids with step parents, and also children who were living with single parents or other family members after a parent had been deceased. Our next study is going to be the long-term impact of parental divorce on long-term intimate relationships. So this goes along with one of our main points of this project, in that divorce kind of causes these children to have poor peer relationships. So this study, they started off by surveying 9th graders, and then they surveyed them at age 32 to gather information about their intimate relationships. Parental divorce was associated significantly with marital status at the age of 32. Females of divorce have weaker intimate relationships. They are more likely to engage in have negative attitudes towards divorce, have negative attitudes and negative couple communications, and they're also more likely to have less trust and less satisfaction in their relationships. So they are searching for something that maybe doesn't exist. Our next study is Joint Physical Custody and Adolescents' Subjective Well-Beings by A.K. Sodermans. This was a large study done in Belgium, consisting of 6,000 ever married parents, so meaning either were married or are still married, and 1,000 children. They measured the subjective well-being, and also the negative effects that happen to be feelings of depression. Seeing how environment affects, and they also wanted to see how environment affects personality. Excuse me. Personality is important in the subjective well-being, and females of divorce tend to have higher levels of depressed feelings after the divorce happens. There are many factors that go into personality and its interaction with well-being in divorce. Those that are more mellow are able to handle the negative effects a little bit better. They're more easygoing, more moldable, and they're able to react in a better way to these adverse situations coming up in their lives. And that's why personality and temperament coincides directly with divorce. And it seems that in this study, females had their temperaments generally did not allow them to effectively cope with the divorce of their parents. Our next study is Observations on Adolescent Relationships 5 years after Divorce by N. Kelly. So this longitudinal study wanted to see how children were doing 5 years after their parents' divorce. So this was a longitudinal study done on adolescents from 17 to 23 years old, so a little bit older of the adolescents. with a 5-year follow-up questionnaire. They found that most children of divorce experienced an acceleration in their adolescent development and felt that they matured faster. So felt that they grew up, felt that they were much more autonomous than their peers. They were able and more independent and able to do more adult things. They were a little more grown up. This led most adolescents and young adults to establishing, oddly enough, you'd think that they would be a little bit more mature, but it led them to establishing them more impoverished, immature, ungratifying relationships, and of course a negative view of marriage. So even though that they felt like they grew up faster, they were, like I said earlier, still searching for something in their relationships that wasn't allowing them to have these stable, mature, and gratifying relationships that other people get to have. And our last slide, our last resource that I used was The Triangulation and Child Adjustment After Divorce by R. Van Dijk. So this information was gathered through a survey in 2016 to 2020. The participants were surveyed 3 times a year. Analysts studied child adjustment after divorce and the interpersonal processes and child vulnerability. So those were the 3 to triangulate, the 3 effects. There is no direct link between triangulation and so those 3 things mentioned earlier. There's no direct link between those and internalizing of problems. Most children were found after divorce to externalize their problems, actually, to play them out in front of us. This study emphasizes the importance of family systems and its relation to child behavior, mental health, and internal processes. So this could be why we see so many people or so many children going out and displaying these risky behaviors, going out and vandalizing and having poor relationships with teachers at school and poor peer relationships at school and in sports and stuff like that. And this is one of the reasons why we could be seeing that. So in all, to summarize it up, analyzing the effects of divorce on adolescents is very important in our day and age with the rising divorce rate. All problems associated with parental divorce are avoidable if educated, and we are able to utilize the resources that we have around us. So counseling through school, friends and family that are able to help, create a loving family environment. However, there is still much more research to be done, as well as research to update. I found that most of the studies are outdated and need to be analyzed in today's day and age. Things are very different than, how divorce was in the 80s and the 90s versus now, especially with the rise in technology and social media. I think it's very important for these students to be able to recognize that they're different and they can get the help that they need. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.